Hi, I'm Mike Caldwell. I'm the director of the Business Innovation Zone. The Business Innovation Zone, or the BIZ, was created to help high-growth potential entrepreneurs and businesses in central Iowa. We provide a variety of services, including mentoring, consulting, counseling, validating business models, and help with access to funding for high-growth companies. We offer also a number of networking opportunities, including luncheons once a month and all-day seminars on subjects such as marketing and finance. You can find out more about the BIZ at www.bizci.org.
I'm glad everybody cares about public relations. That warms my heart. How many of you work in public relations or do public relations work? Anybody? All right, cool. So some of this may be at the 101 level appropriate and maybe not, but I'm gonna make my best effort at describing what exactly this public relations thing is, why it's important, and what it takes to be good enough at it to not be BP in the extreme, and more importantly, to have the trust and other reputation building things that are core to sustainable business success. And I'm tethered to my podium here, so I apologize for that. Nobody's asking for this. This is a protest sign. The ground is shifting as we see example after example of people doing the wrong thing, and more importantly, probably not making it right after it happens. So I want to talk about trust, and I want to talk about influence, because the internet specifically is changing some of that stuff pretty quickly. So there's a guy named Dunbar. He says that we have the capacity to have 150 relationships. Okay, that number may be familiar to you. The less familiar number for Dunbar is 50. That's the number of trust relationships that most of us have the capacity to manage. So trust is a scarce resource at the individual level. It's fragile. It takes a long time to build, and it can be broken pretty quickly. There is a public relations firm by the name of Edelman. They're a large global firm. They've done a very nice job of tracking this thing called trust for about a decade. And the trend lines wiggle a little bit, but suffice to say that trust in companies and trust in government to do the right thing is not a majority activity, in the 40 percentile for decade. For the decade they've tracked it, and assumably long before that. We're skeptical. And as the internet has come to prominence and foreground, it becomes easier for us to divine truth for ourselves. All of us, I will submit to you, are getting better at sourcing our own truth and figuring out who we can trust and who we can't on an ongoing basis. I think specific to public relations and trust, know that third parties, academic institutions, news organizations, and others are at the top of the pile for others we look to trust. Beyond that, if I'm looking to figure something out about your company, the next in line is actually your employees, and not necessarily your CEO, but the person inside your organization that I can connect with and talk to, I'm likely to trust. And on down the line we go, passing through the internet and all the way down to ads, which are trusted by about 14% of people. So trust. Now, influence. The Clue Train, anybody read this book? Anybody know about this book? More than 10 years old. And I'd submit to you, still very relevant. A bunch of theses laid out. The basic premise is there's no audience. People are expecting you to act. They might listen to you if you have something compelling to say, but that the word of mouth is what moves markets. The marketplace conversation is really what we're talking about here. And so having a role in that conversation, moving that conversation is core to public relations. Core to what your company needs to be successful, finding those people who will talk about you when asked or even unsolicited. And I think one of the reasons this is still relevant 10 years on is that we see companies that are still afraid of the voice of their customer, and they're still afraid of the voice of their employees. And what I would offer to you is that you shouldn't be afraid. The research tells us, and I'd put Ed Keller at the top of the pile in terms of people who study this, will tell you people will say good things. Word of mouth is something like 80 or 90% good things. That's also 80+% offline, thus invisible in the land of the internet. So don't fear bad things. We all want to have utility. Think about the things you share. Most of us won't go out of the way to talk about a bad experience. We might offer it. If somebody has a question, we want to steer people away from trouble, but we do want to share the things that are remarkable, and the things that exceed our expectations. Those are the kind of things that we want to create and to drive influence. And here's the shattering effect. The internet is no longer at human scale. We're all consuming online news in addition to the offline stuff. TV is still at the top of the pile. I was talking earlier today about television. National and local television is still most of what we consume in our media day. But the internet is the second pile, and it's broad and deep. And all of us have the corners that we like to hang out in. And so, for your company, figuring out which corners matter becomes increasingly important. There's been for a long time a conversation about earned media and paid media. And earned means you do something, obviously, that people think is worth talking about or writing about. Paid is what we're talking about with advertising and sponsorship. And there's this third piece right in the middle that is the internet and some other things called owned media. It is your website. It is your blog. It is the videos you produce. It is the events you host. Everyone's a publisher now. Each of us individually can the barriers are down. We can publish whatever we'd like. I can talk to another employee inside my company. I can talk to a customer. That conversation is public. This is the dynamic for influence. And if you've not seen this graphic before, there's a website devoted to the conversation prism. It's gone through a couple of iterations. The point is that your company's in the middle. And all these forces converge around this conversation about your company and what it means to have a relationship with you. The equation between public relations and media relations is long-standing and important. The point I want to make here is that media are part of this marketplace conversation. Not too long ago, they weren't. Now they are figuring out what they want to write about, and then they're doing their homework on your website. And not some of them, all of them. And in fact, most of them are networked in some form or another. The takeaway here is, for the journalists that are important to your business, your space, figure out who they are, identify them. They're probably publicly visible. They're probably participating in the marketplace conversation. And it's in your interest to stay close to them and form a relationship that exchanges value. Another public relations firm, Cone Communication. I will take issue with the phrase new media, but nonetheless, I was floored by this. Because to the extent that the internet is this vast place of opportunity, and to the extent that all of us are online, this is very recent data. And it says that most of us aren't paying attention to companies. We don't devote that much attention to companies. I have more than 10 companies. I'm in the 8%, and I don't know how this relates to your life. But what they found with a large sample was that most of us really aren't paying attention to what brands have to say on the internet. That conversation between individuals and companies is just not as robust as the potential could be. So, let me make the point. What is it that you're going to do that's going to make you so valuable you need to be one of the five, one of the follow five, according to this data? That's the point here. And again, to pour more water on social media a little bit, if you own a social network or you own an entertainment company, you probably get a ton of traffic from Twitter. That's where the link. This is links on Twitter and where they go by category. And I apologize if this is hard to read, but look near the top in this insurance town, business and finance. Now, I'm not suggesting that Twitter doesn't drive some companies as a core part of how they build relationships and so on and so forth. I'm just suggesting to you that that online influence is diffuse, and you need to be careful about how quickly or how broadly you think you can reach using social media. I mentioned earlier, people have all these things they want to associate with public relations, and somebody will ask me, well, what do you do? Well, I'm in public relations. And then I get the stare, because they don't really know what that means. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the practice of public relations, the value of public relations, before we get into the things I submit you need to be doing in the year ahead to be successful. PR does not stand for press release. It's a management function. Its job is to mutually adapt to a changing circumstance between the organization and all the people that are a stakeholder in it, employees, customers, and on down the line. So three functions here. Reputation management, and I'll talk about this in the form of a story. This is Michael Strahan. He's introducing you to megabus.com. They actually are in this market, but this was their New York City launch. They are a bus company. If I ask you to take the bus, most of you are going to think Greyhound. And you're probably going to avoid it. You'll pay to take the plane, even though traveling by plane is a lot less glamorous nowadays than it used to be. Then they're a client, but I'll submit to you they are almost solely responsible for remaking what it means to take a bus in this country. MTA and local market not included. The distance you travel between cities, bus is a viable option all over the East Coast and in the Midwest, and as of today, from DC down into the South. This reputation that they're clean, fast between cities, prices starting at $1. I mean, this Wi-Fi on board, this is a remaking of what it means to take the bus. And it was public relations, almost exclusively, that built that relationship with what is now 7 million customers, and continues to defend it against competition as people have figured out that, hey, it's not such a bad idea to take the bus, and hey, I could probably start one of these bus companies too. And they have competition coming from every market they serve now. So your reputation and its value. Is anybody familiar with this esteemed East Coast publication? This was a social media snafu of the moment in recent weeks. Small East Coast publication publishing recipes and other cooking advice, and they scraped content off the internet and didn't attribute the copyright to the owner. When the owner spoke up to the publication, they were roundly dismissed by the publisher as not needing to do the right thing. And watch out, because here comes the internet. Go to this Facebook page they encourage you to check out. See the 7,000 people who had no relationship until this thing took flight, and look at how they're pillaring somebody who doesn't respect intellectual property. These folks didn't see an issue with copyright, and when it came to their doorstep, they didn't manage it well. And this is a live issue. We're going to watch this thing play out. There's countless examples of these, but the management function of public relations that says, here's the right thing to do, let's not do the wrong thing, or something has gone wrong and let's make it right. That's another core management function for public relations. And then finally, relationship management. We have clients that come to us because they want more customers. We have to start customer relationships, or they need to recruit employees. This is core to what we're talking about here. We also might be looking for advocacy or referral behaviors in nonprofits or corporate settings. And we might also be ending relationships, moving the company, removing a part of the leadership team or a member of the board of directors. And in each one of those steps, the people who are paying attention, they want to see that you're acting appropriately, and they want you to communicate fully with them. The photo here is, the photo here is a 100-year-old Swiss-based company now known as Roche Pharmaceutical. We did a lot of work for them a number of years ago when they had a couple of arguably breakthrough drugs around obesity and around AIDS, a whole new category creation. The challenge for them is pharmaceutical is highly regulated. Okay? So their ability to create relationships with the customers was kind of in a box. And moreover, who loves pharmaceutical companies? I mean, they are at the bottom of the pile for organizations that we trust and love. So this is who we do trust and love related to health and wellness. And it's doctors at the top. And pharmaceutical companies down at the bottom at 7%. So what they had to do was have the doctor relationships, the patient relationships in place to not only drive their business, but to be able to talk about what they do in a credible way, in a meaningful way that would resonate with people as they came to market with these billion-dollar investments in drugs. So the third parties that you can connect with and maintain relationships with will often do a lot of the public relating on your behalf. Participation required is another thing that PR stands for. There's no passive way to have a reputation, to build relationships, to manage them. There was a gentleman named Todd Deffrin in town for a PRSA event, and he made passing reference to his client at Shift Communications, the Home Depot. Please pay attention to what Home Depot is doing here. In very recent past, they have spread the responsibility for helping customers to every member of their team in the aisles of the store and online. You would expect them to have great how-to videos. You would expect them to be in the well-known social outposts. But what they're doing, how they've enabled their people to do this work is excellent PR, great brand burnishment, definitely the bridge into marketing and customer service that we like to see when we talk about integrated communication. This is worth studying a little bit, looking at the 600,000 people on Facebook that have a true relationship with Home Depot. So let's talk about what to do. I'm not encouraging recklessness. Our friend Charles might be encouraging recklessness, but there is a method. There are some principles to public relations. The tactics are going to be situational, and I'm hoping we'll have time to ask specific questions that I might be able to speak to. But I want to talk about the core buckets of this work. And at the front end, particularly for those of you starting or in a new company, the plan comes first. The plan should always come first, but particularly when we're starting a new concern, we all individually want to be part of something that's bigger than ourselves. We want the causes in our lives. We want the rallying calls. And so I think beyond making money, employing people, having goods and services available, identifying the higher callings of your organization are the points for advocacy and engagement that do develop into a public relations program. That deserves some thought. That's DNA style, brand style work, but that allows you then to go beyond employees, customers, vendors, et cetera, to say, who else is a stakeholder? Who else might care about what we're trying to accomplish? Get them inventoried. Get them into a form where you can reach them. They can reach you. There becomes a conversation. And how you begin that conversation and how you sustain it is the whole bucket of tactics. I'm going to talk through some of that here in a second. And measurement. We're big on measurement, and it doesn't have to be complicated. I think to some it might seem intimidating to have one more thing to do, particularly in the bucket called PR. But simple questions. Are you getting attention? Are you getting engagement? And are you meeting your business goals? Those are the core questions around measurement for PR work. So here they are. 4 steps, short and sweet, not all easy, but let's walk them down. Listening, first and foremost and always in a loop. This is getting easier. And we're talking about really 2 forms of listening. One is the research function, and the other is the monitoring function. Research primarily is the formal stuff. It needs to happen offline. It needs to happen, if you're brick and mortar, it needs to happen in your store as well as with customer surveys and all those kinds of things. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but look at impaneling a group of folks important to you, customers, et cetera. Ask them to follow you across time. We've seen some pretty compelling use of customer panels as a way to drive product development, product refinement. Any of you done beta testing? Anyway, that's the premise here. Bake it in. Bake your people into your process from a research standpoint. And the other thing is monitoring. These tools are everywhere, and they're free and simple, and they're expensive and complex. And I think what fits for you is for you to decide. But it's mandatory because the opportunities are everywhere. Some of it's serendipity, but it can move the needle. Here's Jay Baer, another great PR and social media mind, talking about customers talking on Twitter instead of getting the flight attendant's attention, and corporate communication there to save the day. Similarly, here's an issue with our client, and we're listening closely enough that we can get to the reporter and help them do their job. There's so much opportunity from listening and seizing opportunities and minimizing threats. You gotta listen. And then action, and this is the hard part. There's a guy named James Hogan up in Vancouver. He's a partner firm of ours, just wrote a great book about doing the right thing. For decades, he has said that PR is two things. First, do the right thing, and then talk about it. It is the doing that gets the attention. It is the doing that's remarkable. And there's a fire hydrant on the screen because Clow Valve down in Oskaloosa did a whole lot of doing, and they're still doing the doing. They had an issue with a supplier that was threatening the operation of fire hydrants. They have gone on a hunt at street level in cities all across the country to find the affected hydrants and replace them at their own cost, ultimately at the cost of the supplier of the faulty product. But the point is that exceeding people's expectations, the actions of the organization, are really the foundation upon which you get to tell stories about hunting for fire hydrants and why I would probably never buy a fire hydrant from anybody else than Clow Valve. And then the speaking, and this is where sometimes we need to add capacity. We need people who can write and tell stories and all that kind of stuff. There's no shortage of this. Again, I think it's attention scarcity more than anything, but telling a story clearly and often is the threshold here. Again, when you have third-party voices who can do telling, you're more credible, you have more reach, etc. I think the other thing to remember here, particularly as it relates to media, the people who are still journalists, the people who have writing daily for news outlets, is to respect their time. You've obviously acted. Talk about the action. Make sure you have news in your dealings with journalists. But let's be clear about it. I talked earlier about earned, owned, and paid media. The owned space is vital. There's so much rich fodder in the owned media now. And here's Google with an example of owned media. This is email. They launched a data center in Council Bluffs, which some of you may be aware of. And a lot of people said, Council Bluffs? And so they put an exclamation point behind that because they wanted everybody to understand why Council Bluffs. But most importantly, they wanted their employees to live in that community. Obviously, there's another town right across the river with a lot of people in it. But they've made their home in Iowa. And so to tell a story through multiple channels repeatedly to get people to understand why Council Bluffs is a great place, why Google is there, and why people might consider living there is, I think, a compelling example of speaking. And then here we go. The reputation, the infallible, inflammable, indestructible reputation comes from that cycle being repeated over and over and over. And I think without a plan, organizations are prone to PR stunts, flash campaigns, those kind of things. I mean, the sustaining of that loop is really where you have the reputation that allows you to defend, because stuff happens. BP had this happen. They get the F+ for crisis communication, crisis response. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think we like to look at the risks an organization faces and mitigate them to the extent possible. Those aren't necessarily communication functions. Those are operating functions. That's what the business does. Where are the holes that need plugged so that you don't have your name in the media, for example, in a way that you don't want it had. The silver lining in an incident is you have people's attention. And I've talked a couple times about exceeding expectations. People are paying attention when something goes wrong. And if you can move beyond that in a way that goes beyond what they expect you to do, you probably not only retain every stakeholder, including customers, you probably gain some in the process. This is the reputation defense of crisis. So have a crisis plan, Get rid of as many risks as you can, and when stuff happens, go above and beyond. Don't hide. Don't hide from the light, because that is your opportunity to gain and grow your reputation. We see organizations not fully embracing the value maybe of some of these functions, and we see organizations that are just busy. I mean, all of us have things we need to do, and if you're a small business owner, you have a lot of things to do. I guess my point would be to you that however you choose to do this, bake it in. Make sure that you don't forget about this, because when the oily bird scenario comes upon you, you want to make sure you've been doing this work. The setups that have worked best is when the CEO and others on the leadership team are committed to a PR program. It's part of their dashboard for how they're managing. When it comes to staffing, I think we're talking about skill sets that understand storytelling, understand relationship building, understand publishing. Those are the things you want to hire. That person can wear a lot of hats. I mean, we see people who are, they have titles like VP of Marketing or VP of Communication, but for reputation, for influence, there's a PR skill set that should probably be part of the hats that they wear. And then finally is the outsourcing thing. On a project basis or on a retained basis, sometimes the extra eyes, ears, arms, and legs are important to make sure it's getting done. One note on hiring a PR firm, you don't need to issue an RFP. I would submit to you that finding a few firms who have relevant expertise, sitting down with them, understanding what they do, understanding how far a budget might go, is a good way to identify who might be a potential partner. And if from that standpoint, then you want to take next steps, you've saved yourself a ton of time. We've seen hiring processes that are so wasteful on both sides because they're at arm's length. The first step, if you want to do outsourcing, is to sit down over coffee and figure out whether it's a fit or not. Everybody wins in that stance. I have two handouts, one of which has been printed. The other is, I'm sure will be available on the website. The Council of Public Relations Firms has a very useful guide to this work, and it's called How to Hire a Public Relations Firm. And it has worksheets in it and everything else. So beyond that, they also have an RFP builder. So I would point you to the council if you're considering making a PR or any other communication hire for that matter. So the question is, how can you make online participation in your employees something everybody gets to do, particularly in a regulated environment? Because I think that's the challenge. Even though an organization might be willing, they might be in a legal constraint. They might be in a box they can't get out of. I think that's going to, the regulatory environment will always be moving around, I would imagine. But there are lots of examples of policy. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of policy that has gone before all of us. And so there are models that work. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be a side hatch problem, but that employee probably goes away and the institution gets to carry on. So I'd say look at what others have written for policy and adapt it to your organization's use. I don't think there's any reason to reinvent the wheel. And as it relates to the regulatory environment, I think that's a situation where permission is probably better than forgiveness. And so I think that probably is part of the conversation around participation. I think trade groups have a role here. I think they need to be out front on this stuff, because I imagine there are a lot of organizations that are hungry to be the exception to, hey, we don't do that because we're in fill in the blank with space, financial, for example. So again, in addition to the company, I think who are the third parties who would advocate for that position? Because you're right, clue train. The premise is that I will trust your people inside your organization. Show them to me. Let me talk to them. They're real people, just like you and me, and I imagine they can be helpful. And I think that's really probably all we are trying to accomplish when we talk about social engagement. This is the trust problem. This is the trust and fear problem that I tried to talk a little bit about up front. trusting your customers, trusting your employees. They're talking. They're already talking anyway. I think the job is to give them permission and show them the way and equip them to do it. That's why I think Home Depot is really compelling. I mean, it's a retail kind of example, but they've put their employees in a position to do exactly that. So we're probably hitting time here. Yeah, thanks.